"You are the disgrace of this family," my mother told me in front of 200 people holding a rhinestone-studded microphone. While I pressed the beige folder against my chest, which she had just snatched from me with both hands, like it was trash picked up from the floor, she opened it without reading it. She looked at it like someone looking at a subway ticket from someone arriving at a gala dinner, and dropped it on the main table with the same disdain she uses to throw away flyers handed to her at stoplights. What my mother didn't know in that moment, what absolutely no one in that newly opened restaurant knew while clapping and toasting with imported sparkling wine, was that the entire building where they were standing, from the concrete foundations to the tempered glass skylight my brother had bragged so much about on his social media, was in the name of my company. And I, the disgrace of the family, the one who arrived in a rattling old sedan that made noise down the avenue, was the owner of every square inch they stepped on. But to understand how I got to that moment, I have to take you back a few years. Because this story doesn't start in a West Hollywood restaurant with linen tablecloths and artisanal mezcal on the tables. It starts in a cramped kitchen in Reseda that smelled of cheap pinto beans and my mother's voice telling my brother that he was the man of the family, telling him he would never lack for anything because that was exactly why she worked so hard. I was 12 years old, sitting on the same wooden stool as always, doing my homework with a chewed-up pencil, listening without anyone knowing I was listening. My brother is 4 years younger than me. From the day he was born, my mother treated him like the whole world had an obligation to revolve around his needs. If he wanted soccer camps, they were paid for. If he wanted a Lakers jersey, it magically appeared on his bed by the weekend. When he turned 18, my mother co-signed the lease on an apartment so he could live alone near the state college which he attended, because the private university turned out to be too expensive that year. That was the same year I started college. I had to enroll in night classes because during the day, I was cleaning houses just to pay my tuition. No one asked me to do it. No one thanked me for it either. My mother's explanation was always the exact same. She said he was the man, and the man needs to get ahead to build a family. I, on the other hand, had to learn to fend for myself because life was going to be harder for a woman, and I might as well get used to it while I was young. She said it like she was doing me a favor, like forcing me to grow up the hard way was a gift wrapped in a bow that I should be grateful for. My grandfather was the only one who saw it differently. He was a man of few words and calloused hands, who had built a small construction supply company from the ground up. No fancy last names, no connections, just sweat and the stubbornness of a man who knows he doesn't have a plan B. When I started my architecture degree, he was the only one who asked how I was doing, the only one who sat with me at the kitchen table to look over my design drafts, clumsy, enthusiastic, and full of eraser marks, and told me they were good. 3 years before everything I'm about to tell you, my grandfather ended up in the hospital with a massive heart attack. They operated on him twice. The second time, he never made it out of intensive care. I stayed in that waiting room for 6 days straight, sleeping on hard plastic chairs. My mother and brother only showed up for a couple of hours during visiting times. They said work couldn't wait. They said stress wasn't good for them, that hospitals just gave them bad vibes. The last night my grandfather was lucid, he grabbed my hand from the hospital bed and told me something I keep carved inside me, like coordinates on a map. He told me he had put the company in my mother's name years ago for legal reasons, but he always knew she wouldn't know how to take care of it. He told me he had left me something, that it was in the hands of his attorney, and his only request was that I not let what he built turn into a joke. He asked me to save it if I could, and if I couldn't, to at least not let them steal it. He died 4 days later. What I found at the attorney's office was a signed letter and a minority stake in the company. My mother had no idea it existed because my grandfather never mentioned it to her. It wasn't a majority share. It didn't give me decision-making power, but it was a cracked open door that my mother never bothered to check, simply because she never believed I was capable of doing anything with it. That was her most expensive mistake. I had been working in silence for 10 years. I started as a junior draftsperson at an architecture firm in downtown LA. Then I moved up to site supervisor, then project manager. At 31, I opened my own firm with 2 partners I met on a job site in Pasadena. I didn't run ads, I didn't throw launch parties. I posted absolutely nothing on social media. We put our heads down for 4 years, building a portfolio of industrial and commercial clients who didn't need flashy marketing because the results spoke for themselves. By the time I was 35, my firm had contracts with 3 major convenience store chains, a massive California construction group, and 2 commercial developers. We weren't giants, but we were rock solid. And most importantly, we owed nothing to anyone. My mother, meanwhile, had done exactly what my grandfather feared. Less than 5 years after his death, the supply company was in ruins. Credit sales she never bothered to collect. Loans she signed without reading the fine print. Suppliers she paid late and eventually lost. Clients who walked away to the competition. What took my grandfather 27 years to build, my mother disintegrated with the same ease she used to toss aside utility bills without opening them. And then my brother showed up with his brilliant idea. He wanted to open a restaurant, an upscale seafood and fusion place in a newly gentrified area of the city where all the big money was moving. He had the name picked out, he had a logo designed by someone who charged way too much. He even had the Spotify playlist ready to go. What he didn't have was the money the city permits or the slightest clue about how the food service industry actually worked. My mother gave him everything that was left. She sold the supply warehouse, mortgaged the house in Reseda, and signed a massive loan with a private hard money lender, using the only commercial lot left from my grandfather's company as collateral. A prime piece of real estate in a booming neighborhood that was worth infinitely more than she thought, simply because she never bothered to get it appraised. I found out through the attorney. I tried to talk to my mother twice. The first time, she told me it was none of my business. The second time, she slammed the door in my face, telling me I had never contributed a dime to this family and had no right to an opinion. My brother didn't return my texts. His wife blocked my number. So I stayed quiet and got to work. I tracked down the lender's loan. I contacted their legal department. I monitored the payments for 18 months until exactly as I knew would happen. My brother stopped covering the monthly installments just 4 months after the restaurant opened. The revenue couldn't keep up with the luxury lifestyle he had envisioned. The firm moved the file forward. The property went into foreclosure. I bought it at the auction. Not under my name, but under an LLC formed with my partners. A discrete corporate name, no recognizable last names, no visible link to me whatsoever. I paid in cash, using funds I had stacked up over years of fulfilled contracts and invoices paid on time. The lot that served as my mother's final collateral, the very last piece of dirt left from my grandfather's life's work, quietly became mine. No scandal, no one knew a thing. What I didn't anticipate was my brother's sheer audacity. When the restaurant finally started to stabilize a bit, mostly because he hired a chef who actually knew how to cook and changed the concept 3 times, he decided to expand. He wanted to remodel the dining room and build out the terrace. To do that, he needed a construction permit, which depended entirely on the legal status of the property where he was operating. The exact same building, sitting on the dirt I now owned. His lawyers found the title issue, but they couldn't trace the new owner until 2 weeks before the grand opening of the restaurant's second phase. It was the event my mother had turned into the social highlight of the year. The night she was going to host suppliers, potential investors, food critics, and the entire circle of high society women she had spent years trying to impress. I received the official notice from his lawyers on a Tuesday afternoon, asking me to contact them to clarify the ownership status. I didn't reply. Instead, I booked a seat at the opening event using the name of my architecture firm, a name no one in my family had ever heard because they never once asked me what I did for a living. I RSVP'd. I took the folder my lawyers had prepared with all the documents out of my desk drawer and slid it into my brown leather bag, the same battered bag I take to construction sites. The night of the event, I drove alone, like always. The restaurant was on a newly developed avenue, lined with freshly planted trees that didn't provide any shade yet, and exposed concrete facades that might look beautiful in 5 years, but for now just smelled like fresh paint. A valet in a black uniform looked at my car with that exact expression I know by heart. The look of someone calculating a human being's worth based on their vehicle's make and model. I handed him the keys without a word. Inside the place was genuinely stunning. My brother had a terrible eye for business, but fantastic taste in aesthetics. I had to give him that. Warm lighting, dark wood-hanging greenery, the soft hum of conversations blending with background music that didn't get in the way. There were about 150 people scattered across long and round tables. Old money and new money folks dressed in that very specific way wealthy people dress. Understated on the outside, but painfully self-aware. I spotted my mother right by the entrance. She was standing near the bar in a red dress that cost money she didn't have. She was surrounded by women her age, laughing with that forced chuckle of someone practicing how to look natural. When she saw me, her smile didn't vanish instantly. It just slowly dropped in temperature, like turning down the gas on a stove. Her eyes drifted down to my plain clothes, my flat leather shoes, my bag with no designer logo. And when she finally looked back up into my eyes, there was no warmth, and no coldness either. Just that highly specific void of indifference that comes from years of practice. I didn't go over to say hello. There was no need. Not yet. A hostess with an iPad guided me to my table. It was dead last in the back of the room, right next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. I could hear the crash of frying pans and the chef barking orders. My tablecloth was different from the ones in the center, thinner, without the embroidered edges. I sat across from a paper napkin supplier who couldn't stop checking his phone, and an older woman who turned out to be the aunt-in-law of someone nobody at the table could quite identify. I poured myself water from the pitcher and just watched. My brother made his grand entrance 20 minutes later, his wife on his arm. She was wearing a silver dress that caught the light like a disco ball, and the exact expression of someone who has finally arrived right where she always believed she belonged. My brother was laughing loudly, slapping backs, making that specific noise of men who confuse volume with charisma. He worked his way through the main tables, accepting hugs and soaking up praise with that fake modesty where you claim you owe it all to your family while staring at the ceiling. It took them 45 minutes to reach my table. When we finally locked eyes, it took his brain a full second to process me, as if he had forgotten I existed, or had simply hoped I'd have the decency not to show up. "Wow, what a surprise," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." His wife didn't say a word, but she looked me up and down with a slowness that was an insult in itself. "Yeah, I made it," I replied. My brother cleared his throat, glanced at my table, noted my spot by the kitchen door, and smiled. That patronizing smile people use when they think they're being generous. "Look, I'll tell you this because I'm a good guy," he started, lowering his voice just a fraction, but not enough. "The business is blowing up. We're already looking at a second location. And look, I know you haven't had much luck with your thing. That little architecture gig hasn't really panned out. If you want, I could bring you in as an admin. Something part-time to help you out. It's nothing crazy, but it's steady work, benefits, the whole deal. Gotta support family, right?" His wife nodded with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The two tables next to us had stopped their own conversations. I looked at him for a few seconds. I felt the weight of the folder inside my bag. I thought of my grandfather, his calloused hands, and what he asked of me that last night in the hospital. I thought about the 18 months I spent tracking a debt that nobody else gave a damn about. I thought of every single time I called and got sent to voicemail. "That is so kind of you," I told him with all the calm in the world. "I'll definitely consider it." My brother patted me on the shoulder like he had just handed me a massive favor and kept moving to the next table. His wife shot me one last look before turning on her heel. I went back to my water. I was savoring the wait. It was close to midnight. The tables had finished dessert and the liquor was flowing a lot more freely. An assistant dimmed the house lights and hit the center of the hardwood floor with a white spotlight. My mother grabbed a wireless microphone and stepped into the light with the absolute certainty of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment for years. She looked good, I'll admit it. She had her hair done perfectly. She was wearing the emeralds she inherited from my grandmother, the ones she hadn't worn in years because they had been sitting in a safe deposit box. Her own financial desperation had made her forget. But tonight, she was wearing them, and they gleamed under the spotlight, like the past didn't even exist. "Good evening, everyone," she started, her voice echoing loud and confident through the house speakers. "Thank you for joining us on such a special night. This restaurant isn't just a business. It is my son's dream made reality. It is the pride of this family. And it is living proof that when you set your mind to something with faith and hard work, God has your back." Applause erupted. My brother bowed his head with that same fake modesty from the center of the room. My mother kept going. She talked about struggle. She talked about sacrifice. She used the word legacy twice. She brought up my grandfather, acting as if he would have completely signed off on everything she had done with his life's work. That twisted something tight inside my chest, and it took a few seconds to calm down. And then came the time for the gifts. The main partners walked up one by one, handing over envelopes and leather-bound folders and little symbolic gestures that, at these kinds of events, are basically declarations of intent. A wine distributor announced a VIP discount tier. A private equity guy mentioned potential backing for the second location. Every announcement came with a round of applause, and my mother's smile stretching an inch wider. That was when I stood up. I walked from my dark corner by the kitchen straight toward the center of the room. My footsteps didn't make a sound because of my flat shoes, but people started noticing me anyway. There was something in the contrast that demanded attention. My completely unadorned clothes moving through a sea of designer cocktail dresses. My slow, deliberate pace in a room buzzing with festive energy. My mother saw me coming, and her brow furrowed. "Ah," she said into the microphone, forcing a little laugh that was supposed to sound light, but just sounded nervous. "It looks like my daughter wants to say a few words. Come on up, sweetie. Don't be shy." She pushed that pet name out like a needle into my skin. I stopped right in front of her. I pulled the folder out of my bag and held it out. My mother took it with 2 fingers, like it might infect her. She flipped it open without a shred of curiosity, just looking for some excuse to justify the interruption. What she found was heavy stock paper stamped with a state notary seal and a signature she recognized instantly. Because it was the exact same signature that had been on every single legal document of my grandfather's company for 22 years. She blinked hard. She lowered the microphone and leaned in close to me, so close I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the liquor she'd been drinking all night. "What is this?" she asked through gritted teeth, using that low, razor-sharp voice she saved for moments when she wanted to destroy you without anyone else hearing. "Your grand opening gift," I replied, matching her exact tone. She didn't read past the first page. She couldn't, or she just didn't want to. Instead, she brought the microphone back up to her mouth and beamed at the crowd. "My eldest daughter," she announced, her tone dripping with a mix of condescension and fake affection. "Always so serious. Always strictly business. Look at this." She brings work documents to a party. She just has the hardest time enjoying things. A few scattered chuckles rippled through the room. Her inner circle of friends laughed a little louder to make up for the awkwardness. Across the room, my brother raised his glass at me with a smirk. It was the absolute last form of humiliation he had left in the tank. My mother opened her hand. She let the folder drop. The heavy pages separated the second they hit the dark hardwood floor. A few slid underneath the closest table. The notary's watermarked paper landed face down, the official seal pressed flat against the floorboards. That was the moment. I hadn't planned it to happen exactly like this. I had originally intended to do this in private, sitting in a sterile room with her lawyers keeping things orderly and avoiding a scene. But when I saw that folder on the ground and my mother gripping the microphone with that plastic smile she had spent years perfecting, I thought of my grandfather. I thought of the promise. I thought about how he never wanted a scandal, but he also never would have allowed his life's work to end up trampled on the floor of a restaurant built with his own stolen money. I crouched down. I calmly gathered every single page. I stacked them neatly, stood back up, and held my hand out for the microphone. My mother didn't let go right away. There was a full second of raw tension between her fingers and mine, a fraction of a second where her eyes scanned my face, desperately searching for rage or tears or fear. She found absolutely none of the 3. She surrendered the microphone. The room was dead silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The sound system was flawless. I knew because I had personally reviewed the acoustic plans 4 months ago, since the audio contractor was one of my firm's clients. "Good evening. My name is Renata. I am the eldest daughter of this woman and the sister of this man who just opened a very beautiful restaurant on top of a massive legal problem they haven't quite resolved yet." I paused. I watched my brother's smirk freeze and slowly melt away. His wife crossed her arms tightly. "The first document my mother just threw on the floor is a deed of sale, registered and notarized 14 months ago. The lot this building is sitting on, the very floorboards you are standing on right now, went into foreclosure due to a defaulted hard money loan. The bank auctioned the rights. The holding company that bought them is called West Coast Vanguard. And I own it." The gasp that swept through the room was almost visible. It rolled like a wave from the center tables out to the walls. My brother shot out of his chair. "That is a lie!" he yelled, his voice cracking just a little. "My lawyers are handling this. It's a county registry error. We filed an injunction. There is no injunction, I cut in, my tone completely flat. There is a ruling from the 8th Civil Court dated last month dismissing your appeal entirely. It's on page 12 of the folder. If anyone wants to review it, it's public record. A man in his early 60s wearing a dark suit and an understated tie leaned forward from one of the center tables. He was the kind of man who never speaks first in a boardroom, but when he finally does, everyone shuts up. He was the heavy-hitter investor my brother had been actively courting for the last 2 hours. He looked dead at me. "Is this fully notarized?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I answered. "I can email you the digital file tonight if you give me your email address." He gave a single, sharp nod. He leaned back in his chair with an expression that wasn't shocked, just highly calculated. The exact look a man gets when the missing piece of a puzzle just drops right into his lap. My mother lunged at me. "You are a traitor," she hissed. Her voice shattered into pieces. She didn't have the microphone anymore. She didn't have the composure she'd been faking for the last 20 minutes. "After everything I sacrificed for you, after everything I did so you wouldn't go without, this is how you pay me back?" I looked at her. I didn't feel any anger. I didn't even feel that dark, twisted joy I used to imagine during those late nights working alone, thinking about everything they had taken from me. What I felt was something much closer to pity. That specific kind of pity that doesn't hurt anymore because you're already too far away. "You never sacrificed a single thing for me," I told her. "You taught me how to survive on my own since I was 12, because it was a better return on investment to put all your money on him. That isn't sacrifice. That's just math. And I understand it. But I don't accept it." My brother stepped up, his voice, physically shaking now. "You're going to put us out on the street because you're bitter. Because you just can't stand seeing someone else in this family actually succeed." I stared right into his eyes. "You succeed when you build something using your own decisions and your own money," I told him. "You built this using your grandfather's cash, your mother's house, and a commercial deed that was never yours to mortgage. And when you couldn't pay the bill, you ghosted everyone and let the bank swallow it. All I did was buy back what was already lost." I paused. The room was so quiet, you could hear the low hum of the walk-in freezer from the kitchen. "I'm not going to ask you to vacate the premises tonight," I continued. "My attorneys will contact you next week with a commercial lease proposal. If you want to keep operating here, there are strict terms. If you don't, you have 30 days to find a new location. And either way, I am not going to press criminal charges for mortgage fraud and the illegal use of assets that didn't belong to you. That is the one and only favor I'm doing for you. And I'm only doing it because my grandfather taught me that money problems don't have to turn into prison sentences if there's another way out." I turned back to the investor in the dark suit. "Sir, if you are still interested in exploring opportunities in the restaurant sector with a fully vetted, legally cleared property, I would be happy to schedule a meeting. Here is my card." I pulled out one of my firm's business cards. Simple, heavy white stock, just my name and my direct line. I set it down on his table. As I walked past, I placed the microphone gently back onto its stand and headed for the exit. I didn't run. I didn't look back when I heard my brother's voice calling my name. I didn't look back when I heard my mother start to cry. That specific. Manufactured crying. I had spent 38 years learning to separate from actual grief. I didn't even stop when my brother's wife caught up to me at the entrance, grabbing my arm, hissing that I was a selfish bitch, demanding to know how I could possibly do this to my own family. I gently pulled my arm out of her grip. I made this decision all by myself, just like every other decision in my life, I told her. Have a good night. The valet brought my car around without making me wait. I got in, shut the door, and for a long moment I just sat there, with my hands resting on the worn plastic of the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine. I just listened to the muffled sounds of the new avenue, looking at those tiny trees that couldn't cast a shadow yet. Someone had asked me once, in a random conversation years ago, if I was actually happy. I hadn't known how to answer, because I had never found the exact word to describe what lived inside me. But that night, sitting in a dark parking lot alone in my beat-up car, with the legal folder resting on the passenger seat, I finally found the word. Solid. Not euphoric, not victorious in some loud, chest-beating way. Just solid. Like concrete when it finally finishes curing and no longer needs anyone to hold it up. I turned the key and pulled out onto the avenue. That night, I confirmed something I had suspected for years but needed to look dead in the eye to know it was true. You do not need validation from the people who break you. You don't need it to keep going. You don't need it to build an empire. You don't need it to know exactly who you are. What feels like a curse growing up without a safety net, without applause, without anyone paving the road ahead of you, is actually the most brutal, honest training ground on earth. Because the things you build when absolutely no one is watching are the only things that truly belong to you. My grandfather understood that from day one. That's why he worked in silence. That's why he built without bragging. And that is exactly why, when the time came to pass something down, he didn't hand me a stack of cash. He handed me information. He taught me how to read the fine print nobody else wanted to look at. He left a door slightly cracked, knowing I would have to learn how to kick it open myself. If you've listened to this story all the way through, I need you to understand one thing very clearly. I did not do this out of spite. I asked myself that question 1,000 times during those 14 months. On the nights I was buried in legal briefs instead of sleeping, I asked myself if rage was driving the car. I wondered if deep down, I just wanted to watch them burn. And the answer I found was no. What drove me was exactly what I promised my grandfather. I refused to let what he bled for be destroyed by someone else's carelessness and sheer greed. Justice and vengeance look identical from the outside. The difference is where they come from. Vengeance is born from pain. Justice is born from clarity. I acted from absolute clarity. If you have a story like this, if you've ever been seated at the back table because they thought you wouldn't bite back, if someone in your own family used your silence as proof that you didn't matter, hit the like button and subscribe to keep hearing stories of women who built in the dark and only spoke when the time was lethal. Tell me in the comments, do you think I was right to wait that long, or should I have dropped the hammer sooner? I read every single one of them. What Renata built wasn't just a company or a notarized deed. It was living proof that silence, when chosen with purpose, is infinitely louder than any scream of rage. When no one reaches out a hand to pull you up, you learn to build the bridge yourself. And that bridge, stacked brick by bloody brick in the hours before dawn, when nobody is clapping for you, is the only one that will never collapse under your weight. Just a quick note for those who stayed until the end. This story was crafted and narrated by artificial intelligence, designed to entertain you, and hopefully leave you with something valuable for the road ahead.